Imagine waking up one day to the sight of an alien armada descending from the skies, their ships blocking out the sun as an eerie silence falls over the world. Governments collapse, technology fails, and hope flickers like a dying candle. The invaders are nothing like humanity has ever faced, intellectually and technologically superior in every way. They predict every human move before it happens, outmaneuver every strategy, and render every weapon useless. In mere days, they take control of the planet. Humanity is no longer the dominant species. And yet, against all odds, a single human manages to outsmart them all. How is that possible? How can one person succeed where entire nations have failed? This is the story of how a single mind outwitted an entire alien civilization. When the invasion began, Earth's greatest minds were quickly neutralized. The aliens possessed a level of intelligence that surpassed even our most advanced AI. They could decipher languages instantly, process information at unimaginable speeds, and predict patterns with near-perfect accuracy. Every attempt to resist was met with swift and calculated precision. The military, believing strength could prevail, launched their most powerful weapons, only to see them effortlessly disabled. Scientists tried to communicate, to understand, but the aliens anticipated their every method. Governments attempted to negotiate, but the invaders saw no value in dialogue. They had done this before, countless times, across countless worlds. To them, humanity was just another species to be catalogued and controlled. But what they didn't account for was the unpredictability of a single human mind. That human was an unlikely hero. Not a soldier, not a scientist, not a leader. Just someone with a mind unlike any other. Perhaps it was luck, or perhaps it was something far more rare. The kind of intelligence that doesn't just follow patterns but disrupts them. While the rest of the world struggled against the overwhelming force of alien logic, this person saw something different. The invaders relied on their vast intelligence to maintain control. But intelligence has a weakness. It assumes there's always a correct answer, a logical path, an inevitable outcome. What if someone could introduce chaos into that equation? What if, instead of fighting the aliens on their terms, they were forced to play a game where logic itself became a disadvantage? The first step was to remain unnoticed. The aliens had already identified the greatest threats, military leaders, scientists, strategists, and eliminated them. But this one person, an unknown figure in the grand scheme of things, was overlooked. No advanced degrees, no history of strategic brilliance, no reason for the aliens to see them as a problem. That was the first advantage. The second advantage was something far more dangerous, an understanding of deception, of randomness, of the very thing the aliens could not predict. Unlike their previous conquests, where civilizations either surrendered or resisted in predictable ways, humanity had something different. Individuals who defied patterns. And this one person was about to become the anomaly that shattered the aliens' perfect system. It began with small disruptions. The aliens, confident in their ability to monitor and control human actions, depended on an intricate web of surveillance. Their AI systems could track patterns across entire populations, predicting movements, emotions, and intentions before humans even realized them. But what happens when something occurs that has no logical basis? A person walking in meaningless loops for hours, random symbols appearing in places where no human should have been, entire buildings left seemingly untouched, yet crucial pieces of technology vanished without a trace. The aliens' data models struggled to make sense of it. Their systems, designed to process logic, were suddenly confronted with something they couldn't quantify: pure, unexplainable chaos. As their systems worked overtime to decode these anomalies, the hero struck deeper. If the aliens relied on logic, then the key to defeating them wasn't strength or intelligence. It was unpredictability. Humans are flawed, irrational, emotional, and illogical beings, but that very unpredictability became the most powerful weapon. The aliens' advanced minds had evolved beyond the need for deception. Their civilization built on the pursuit of absolute knowledge. But deception, trickery, and randomness were foreign concepts to them. They had never needed to lie, never needed to create false trails, never needed to question the reliability of their own information. And so, for the first time in their long History. They faced an opponent who wasn't trying to outthink them, but to unthink them. The hero began creating patterns within patterns. False leads, conflicting information, strategic nonsense. The aliens' intelligence systems, built to process and act upon data instantly, found themselves in an endless loop of analysis. Every time they adapted, the hero introduced a new variable that rendered their conclusions useless. They would predict a target, only for that target to be a decoy. They would intercept a message, only to find it meant nothing. Their surveillance systems recorded movements that served no purpose, yet seemed too deliberate to ignore. The invasion that had begun with absolute certainty started to unravel. The aliens' greatest strength, their intelligence, was becoming their greatest weakness. And then, the breakthrough came. For the first time, the aliens hesitated. Uncertainty crept into their perfect calculations. They had never encountered a species capable of fighting this way. Not with weapons, not with force, but with sheer maddening unpredictability. The hero knew they had found the weak point. But this was just the beginning. The real challenge was yet to come. The question wasn't just whether they could disrupt the aliens, it was whether they could make them fear the one thing they had never considered, the chaos of the human mind. The aliens, despite their overwhelming superiority, now faced a crisis, unlike anything in their long history. Their calculations, once flawless, now returned contradictions. Their systems, once capable of predicting an entire civilization's downfall within hours, now struggled to process meaningless data. They had expected resistance, but resistance based on patterns, organized revolts, desperate last stands, diplomatic pleas. Instead, they found themselves drowning in a sea of unpredictability. The more they tried to adapt, the deeper they sank, into the very thing they had never accounted for. Chaos at the center of it all was one human, weaving disorder into a precise weapon. If the aliens thrived on logic, then logic itself had to become their enemy. The hero took advantage of every human trait that the invaders had overlooked. Superstition, deception, irrationality. The aliens had no concept of misinformation because they had never needed it. Every species they had encountered before had followed a logical progression: fight, surrender, adapt, assimilate. Humanity was different. Humanity was stubborn. Humanity was willing to believe in things that weren't real, to follow leaders who had no qualifications, to make choices that defied their own survival. And now, those very flaws had been weaponized. The hero introduced myths into the alien, communication networks, legends of human abilities that did not exist, stories of secret weapons that could harness the power of the Earth itself, whispers of individuals who could move unseen, messages that hinted at forces beyond science. The aliens, whose civilization had long since abandoned fiction as a concept, were forced to interpret information in ways they were never designed for. They had no mechanisms for handling deception. Every intercepted transmission had to be considered. Every strange occurrence had to be analyzed. The hero didn't just introduce lies, he made them plausible enough to create doubt. And doubt was something the aliens had never experienced before. With each passing day, their once perfect invasion became a spiraling mess. Their forces hesitated before engaging. Their systems began questioning their own findings, and their entire operational efficiency declined. The hero understood one fundamental truth. Fear isn't just about power. It's about uncertainty. The aliens had never known fear because they had always been in control. But now, for the first time, they faced an enemy they could not fully understand. And that was when the real war began. The hero's next move was psychological. Humans had been studied, their biology analyzed, their intelligence mapped. But what the aliens had failed to consider was the effect of their own failures on themselves. No civilization, no matter how advanced, was free from emotion. The invaders may have eradicated their own concept of fear long ago, but their dependency on absolute certainty made them vulnerable to something just as powerful: doubt. If the hero could make them question their own data, then he could make them question their own decisions. And if they hesitated long enough, they would start making mistakes. He orchestrated encounters that seemed too convenient, sabotages that appeared to be accidents, events that looked like coincidences but weren't. Alien patrols went missing, their last known locations forming patterns that seemed almost supernatural. Key pieces of technology inexplicably malfunctioned at critical moments. Always just enough to delay, but never enough to trace. The aliens prided themselves on their ability to see everything, to know everything. And yet, the more they investigated, the more inconsistencies they found. It was as if something or someone was operating outside their field of understanding. For a species built on absolute knowledge, the idea of an unknown variable was terrifying. They started overcompensating, deploying resources to investigate false threats, spreading their forces thinner, diverting attention from their main objectives. The hero had forced them into a position where their own intelligence became a burden rather than an advantage. They were losing efficiency, reacting instead of controlling. The shift was subtle at first, but the cracks in their once perfect system were beginning to show. And the more those cracks spread, the more the rest of humanity began to notice. Small acts of defiance that had once been crushed instantly now lasted longer, giving rise to resistance cells. It wasn't just about survival anymore. It was about possibility. The hero had done more than disrupt the aliens. He had planted the idea that they could be beaten. But the aliens weren't finished. Even in the face of unpredictability, they still held the ultimate advantage: technology, numbers, control. If they couldn't predict their enemy, they would simply overwhelm him. They initiated a lockdown, cutting off entire regions, restricting human movement, implementing stricter surveillance. The hero had managed to slip past their systems before, but now they were closing every loophole. The world grew quieter, the resistance became harder. It seemed as if the aliens had regained control, but the hero knew better, because in their desperation to restore order, they had made one fatal mistake. They had started to fear, and fear makes even the most intelligent beings irrational. The aliens had come to Earth as an unstoppable force, certain of their superiority, confident in their ability to subdue yet another civilization. But now, their actions revealed something profound. Doubt had taken root in their minds. Their decision-making, once flawless, now showed hesitation. Their forces, once precise, now reacted emotionally. They had begun to see ghosts where there were none, to second-guess their own intelligence. And in their attempt to regain control, they had fallen into the hero's final trap: the lockdowns, the restrictions, the increased surveillance. These weren't obstacles. They were opportunities. By tightening their grip, the aliens had created something they never intended: pressure. And pressure breeds rebellion. With entire regions isolated, humanity was no longer fighting as a scattered resistance. They were forced into close quarters, forced to communicate through unconventional means, forced to rely on instinct rather than logic. The very thing that had made humans weak, disorder, was now becoming their greatest strength. And at the heart of it all was the one human who had led the aliens into a battle they could no longer control. The hero understood that the final step wasn't just to disrupt. It was to break the aliens entirely, and that required one last illusion, one final stroke of deception so grand that the invaders would lose all sense of reality. It started with a whisper. A rumor passed through the resistance, intercepted by the aliens. A signal, not from Earth, but from somewhere else. A distant frequency, barely detectable, filled with coded messages that seemed to come from beyond the planet. The aliens, desperate to reclaim their understanding of the situation, analyzed the signal. It carried patterns similar to their own, a structure they recognized but couldn't fully interpret. And then the final twist: the message changed. It contained information about Earth, about the invasion, about the failures they had encountered. But it wasn't coming from humans. It was coming from someone else. The aliens, for the first time, faced the possibility that they were not alone in this war. That perhaps another force, another intelligence was watching, studying, intervening. The hero had used their own paranoia against them, because for a civilization that prided itself on knowing everything, the idea of an unknown power watching from the shadows was terrifying. They had believed themselves the apex intelligence of the universe. Now they questioned whether they were the ones being studied, whether they were the prey instead of the predator. In their panic, the aliens made a final, desperate decision. They could no longer afford the risk. If another force was observing, if there was even the slightest chance that their failures on Earth were being recorded by a greater entity, then retreat was the only logical option. They could not allow themselves to be seen as weak. Their dominance had to remain unquestioned. And so, just as suddenly as they had arrived, they vanished. Their ships lifted from the surface, their machines shut down, their presence erased. They left behind only ruins and unanswered questions, but in the end, they had been defeated. Not by weapons, not by brute force, but by something far more powerful, the fear of the unknown. As humanity emerged from the aftermath, the hero remained in the shadows. There were no parades, no recognition, no statues built in their honor. Their name would never be recorded in history, because in the end, their victory had never been about glory. It had been about survival. And they understood the truth that few would ever know. Sometimes the greatest power isn't intelligence or strength. It's knowing how to make even the most powerful enemy question everything they believe to be true. Because in a battle between logic and chaos, chaos always has the final move. The world was never the same after the invasion. The scars of their presence lingered in every ruined city, every silent battlefield, every piece of alien technology left behind. But for most of humanity, the story ended the day the ships vanished. The war was over. The enemy was gone. Life could begin again. But for the hero, the one person who had outwitted an entire alien civilization, the war had never truly ended. Because even though the invaders had retreated, they had left behind something far more dangerous than their weapons or their machines. They had left behind a question. Why had they fled? To the rest of the world, it seemed like a victory won by human defiance, by a mind that had outmaneuvered even the most advanced intelligence. But the hero knew better. The aliens were not afraid of humans. They were afraid of something else. The message, the false signal that had tricked them into believing they were being watched, had been a deception. But what if it wasn't? What if, in fabricating an enemy greater than the invaders, the hero had unknowingly revealed something real? Because before the aliens left, they did something that had never been reported. In the final hours of their withdrawal, their ships sent out a final transmission, a message, not to their own kind, but into deep space. A message written in their own intricate language, broadcast across the cosmos. A distress signal, and now, something had answered. The first signs were subtle. Strange disturbances in the electromagnetic field, radio frequencies fluctuating without reason, deep space observatories detecting patterns in the cosmic background noise. At first, the scientists dismissed it as interference, a side effect of the lingering alien technology. But then the patterns repeated. Rhythmic, intentional. A message hidden in the static. The hero, still watching from the shadows, recognized the truth before anyone else. The deception that had driven the aliens away had not just tricked them, it had attracted something else, something real. And it was coming. Governments scrambled to prepare, uncertain whether this new presence was friend or foe. World leaders, still reeling from the last invasion, debated in secrecy. Should they respond? Should they hide? Should they prepare for another war? But the hero knew there was no point in preparation. Because this wasn't an invasion. It was something worse. The aliens had left Earth in fear, not of humanity, but of the possibility that they were not alone. And now, the unknown force that had driven them away had taken notice of Earth. It had seen the deception, the fabricated signal. And if the invaders had feared it, then humanity had every reason to do the same. Then, the first true sign arrived. A single object, traveling at impossible speeds, entering the solar system without warning. Unlike the massive warships of the previous invaders, this was something different. No visible structure, no identifiable technology, just a shadow moving through the void, shifting between spectrums, distorting every attempt to observe it. Satellites failed when they tried to scan it. Probes sent to intercept vanished without a trace. It did not attack. It did not communicate. It simply watched, studied. An intelligence beyond human understanding had arrived. And the hero, the one who had once outwitted an entire alien race, now faced a terrifying realization. They had spent so long thinking like humans, like soldiers, like strategists, like survivors. But this was different. This was something beyond war, beyond logic, beyond fear itself. The invaders had been predictable in their arrogance. But this was something else. Something ancient. Something unknowable. And for the first time, the hero felt what the aliens must have felt in their final moments on Earth, a fear beyond reason. A fear of the unknown. The world held its breath as the object remained at the edge of the solar system, unmoving yet undeniably present. The greatest minds on Earth worked in secret, trying to decipher what it was, what it wanted. Some believed it was a scout, an observer sent by an unseen force. Others feared it was something worse, a predator assessing its prey. And yet, despite the tension, no action was taken. Humanity had learned one harsh lesson from the last war. Engaging with something unknown could be the deadliest mistake, but the hero wasn't satisfied with waiting. They had spent too long in the shadows, too long manipulating the battlefield, from behind the scenes. If this thing had come in response to their deception, then they had a responsibility to understand what they had unleashed. And so, against the warnings of every scientist, every leader, they did something no one else dared to do. They sent a message. It was simple. A transmission, directed toward the object, repeating the same fabricated distress signal that had once fooled the alien invaders. A test. A gamble. If this intelligence was truly the force the invaders had feared, then it would recognize the signal for what it was. A trick. But if it responded, if it engaged, then humanity would have an answer. A terrible, undeniable answer. The message echoed into the void, disappearing into the silent depths of space. For hours, there was nothing. No movement. No change. Then, without warning, the object shifted. It did not move in any conventional sense. It did not accelerate or follow any detectable trajectory. It simply appeared in a different position, as though it had rewritten its own existence. The hero, watching through secured military systems, felt a cold dread settle in their chest. The invaders had been powerful, yes. But they had moved within the laws of physics, within the limits of technology. This thing did not. It obeyed rules humanity did not understand then. The response came. Not as a message, not as an attack, but as an overwhelming surge of data flooding every frequency on Earth. It was not language. It was not communication. It was raw information, pouring into human networks, breaking through firewalls, hijacking satellites, a deluge of impossible knowledge, numbers that made no sense, equations that defied mathematics, symbols that seemed to shift as they were observed. It wasn't trying to talk. It was trying to teach, and then, just as suddenly as it had begun, the flood of data ceased. The object was gone. No trace, no energy signature, no record of its departure. It had come, it had observed, and now it had left. But what it had left behind was something more dangerous than any invasion. Knowledge. The information embedded in its transmission began spreading before governments could contain it. Scientists, engineers, programmers, anyone who touched the raw data was changed by it. They didn't just understand it, they felt it. It rewired thought processes, altered perception, made impossible ideas suddenly make sense. The world was on the brink of something new, something terrifying. Because this wasn't just knowledge, this was evolution. And the hero realized, too, late, what had truly happened. They had not tricked the invaders into retreating. They had summoned something greater. The world unraveled faster than anyone could contain it. The data left behind by the unknown entity spread like wildfire, slipping past government firewalls, leaking into private networks, embedding itself in places no one could erase. Scientists who examined it for too long began speaking in symbols, their words shifting into equations no human had ever written. Mathematicians found numbers that didn't exist. Engineers built machines without understanding how they worked, and artists painted visions of things humanity had never seen. Something deep within the human mind had been unlocked, and it was irreversible. At first, the changes seemed subtle. People became more efficient, solving problems that had plagued humanity for centuries in mere hours. Diseases were cured overnight. Energy sources were harnessed from impossible places. But with every leap forward, something else emerged, something darker. The more people interacted with the knowledge, the more detached they became from reality. Logic replaced emotion. Structure overtook creativity, and soon, Those who had absorbed the most of the data no longer spoke to those who had not. They looked at the world as if seeing it for the first time, not as a home, but as an equation waiting to be solved. The hero, watching from the sidelines, realized the truth before anyone else. This wasn't just intelligence. This was something else. Something beyond human understanding. The entity hadn't just shared knowledge. It had rewritten the way humans processed reality itself, and the more they changed, the less human they became. Then, the first disappearance occurred. A scientist at a secured facility, one of the first to have fully decoded the message, simply vanished. Security footage showed them standing still, for hours, their body barely moving, their eyes staring at nothing. And then, gone. No trace, no energy signature, no record of departure. Just erased. As if they had been plucked from existence by something unseen. And they weren't the last. Across the world, the most brilliant minds, the ones who had absorbed the most knowledge, began vanishing in the same way. At first, the disappearances were dismissed as anomalies, coincidences. But then, something far worse happened. Some of them came back. The first return was a scientist in Berlin. She had been gone for 3 days. When she reappeared, she was standing exactly where she had disappeared, her body untouched, her face expressionless. But something was wrong. Her voice was different, her movements too precise. When asked where she had been, she only gave one response: "I have seen beyond the pattern, and now I am part of it." The world erupted in panic. Governments declared states of emergency, trying to contain those who had vanished and returned. But the more they tried to control it, the worse it became. Because those who had returned were no longer human in the way the world understood. They did not eat. They did not sleep. They did not speak unless spoken to. And worst of all, they were waiting. The hero knew without a doubt that the entity had not left. It had merely planted something, an idea, a transformation, a doorway. The knowledge it had given wasn't a gift. It was an infection. And the moment enough people understood it, the moment the pattern was completed, something would happen. Something inevitable. Humanity had outsmarted the first invaders. But this was something else entirely. This was not an enemy that could be tricked or fought or reasoned with. This was a force beyond intelligence, beyond time, beyond fear itself. And, soon, humanity would no longer be human at all. The world had changed, and there was no going back. Cities stood silent, their streets filled with people who no longer spoke. Governments collapsed, not through war or rebellion, but through irrelevance. Those who had touched the knowledge, the ones who had seen the pattern, were no longer concerned with laws or borders. They had become something else. And the rest of humanity? They were simply waiting, caught between the old world and the new, between fear and the pull of something they could not understand. The hero had spent their life outthinking enemies, bending the battlefield to their will, manipulating the minds of those who sought to control the world. But now, there was no enemy to outmaneuver, no weakness to exploit. There was only the shift, a slow, inevitable tide sweeping over everything. And they were one of the last who could still feel fear. Then came the first signs of the final stage. The sky began to change, shifting in ways that could not be explained by science. Stars that had never been there before appeared overnight, forming patterns no telescope had ever recorded. The air felt heavier, as if reality itself was bending, stretching to accommodate something new. And then, the final signal came. One last transmission, a message that played across every screen, every device, every frequency on Earth. You are ready. It was not a declaration. It was a statement of fact. And as the hero watched, the world itself seemed to breathe. Those who had been changed, the ones who had seen the pattern, looked up in unison. Their eyes were no longer human. Their voices, when they finally spoke again, carried no emotion, no fear, no hesitation. They were no longer individuals. They were part of something greater, and then reality itself began to fracture. The hero felt it before they saw it. A pressure in their skull, a vibration in their bones. The buildings around them flickered, not crumbling, but rewriting. The streets shifted, not breaking, but restructuring. The sky was no longer a sky. It was a window, a glimpse into something vast, endless, incomprehensible. And the people, the ones who had changed, began to walk forward, not towards anything, but into something. They stepped through invisible doors, disappearing into places that should not exist. Some rose into the air, not flying but ascending beyond sight. Others simply faded, as if they had never been there at all, and then the hero understood. This had never been an invasion. Never been a war. The aliens, the ones who had come before, had feared something they did not understand. They had fled, thinking they were escaping a force beyond their control. But they had misunderstood. This force had never been a destroyer. It had never been a conqueror. It had been a shepherd. And now humanity was no longer waiting. It was leaving. The hero, standing, alone in an empty city, felt the pull. The knowledge whispered in the back of their mind. The temptation of something greater, something infinite. They had spent their life fighting, surviving, outsmarting. But now, there was nothing left to fight. There was only a choice to remain in the ruins of what once was, or to step into the unknown. And for the first time in their life, the hero did not know what move to make next. The silence was absolute. The world, once teeming with noise and motion, now stood frozen in an eerie stillness. Cities remained intact, their structures untouched, but the people, the billions who had once walked the earth, were gone. Not dead, not taken, just elsewhere. The hero stood at the center of it all, the last flicker of humanity in a world that had outgrown itself. The pull was still there, tugging at the edges of their mind, urging them to step forward, to surrender to the pattern. The knowledge hummed within them, offering glimpses of something beyond time, beyond self. A doorway stood open, not a physical one, but something deeper, interwoven into the very fabric of existence. It was waiting. And they were the last one left to choose. They closed their eyes, breathing in the empty air. This was not the end of the world. It was a transition. Humanity had not been erased, only rewritten into something new. The invaders had fled in terror, believing they had escaped destruction. But the truth was far more terrifying. They had fled ascension. They had been afraid of what they might become, and now the hero was faced with the same choice. A faint sound echoed through the abandoned streets. Footsteps. Impossible. They had believed themselves alone. Turning sharply, they saw a figure standing at the edge of the horizon, silhouetted against the shifting sky. A stranger, or perhaps something more. "You stayed," the figure said, their voice neither warm nor cold, neither welcoming nor threatening. The hero tensed. "So did you." The figure smiled, an expression that felt almost human, but not quite. "No, I left a long time ago." They stepped closer, their presence bending the space around them. "But I came back. Because every time this happens, there is always one who lingers, one who hesitates." The hero's pulse quickened. What is this? What have they become? The figure tilted their head, studying them. "Something beyond what you can understand. Something neither good nor evil, just more." A pause. "You were the one who triggered this, weren't you?" The hero didn't answer. They didn't need to. The figure took another step forward, and for the first time, the hero felt something they hadn't in a long time. Uncertainty. "I have seen countless civilizations reach this point. Some embrace it, some resist. And a rare few like you are caught in between." The hero exhaled slowly. "And what happens to those who resist?" The figure's smile faded. "They remain alone. Forever." The wind shifted, carrying whispers that weren't really sound, but something deeper, something woven into the very fabric of existence. The pull intensified, the invisible force urging them to step forward, to become part of whatever lay beyond. The doorway would not remain open forever. The moment of choice was now. The hero turned back to the empty city, to the echoes of a world that no longer existed. They had always fought to survive, to outthink the impossible. But was survival enough? Could they live in a world where they were the last remnant of what once was? The figure watched, patient, knowing. "It's not about fear," they said. "It's about trust. Can you trust that there is something beyond what you know? Or will you stay here, clinging to a world that has already moved on?" The hero clenched their fists. The doorway pulsed. The choice awaited, and in the silence of an empty world, they took their final step. The hero stepped forward. Just one step, and the world shattered. Not in the way glass breaks or buildings crumble. No, this was something deeper. Reality itself peeled away like the turning of a page, and in an instant, the universe was no longer what it had been. They weren't standing anymore. There was no ground, no sky, no sense of direction. Just motion. Falling, rising, expanding all at once. Colors bled into one another, forming shapes that defied logic, shifting between dimensions the human mind was never meant to perceive. Time unraveled, looping forward and backward, past and future colliding in an endless spiral. And through it all, the hum of the pattern grew louder, not as sound, but as understanding. They could see it now, what the others had become. They weren't gone. They had simply changed. Their forms stretched beyond recognition, no longer bound by flesh or limitation. They were threads in a vast tapestry, pieces of something greater, woven into the structure of existence itself. The hero could feel them, hear their thoughts, not as words, but as pure thought, a chorus of minds moving in perfect synchrony. And then, the voice came. "You are the last." It wasn't a voice in the traditional sense. It was woven into the very fabric of reality, resonating through their bones, through their soul. The figure from before was gone, no longer needed. The hero was standing before the source, the intelligence that had orchestrated everything, the force that had called humanity forward. They weren't afraid. Not anymore. "What happens now?" the hero asked, their voice barely a whisper. The universe pulsed, and in that instant, everything became clear. The invaders who had come before, the ones humanity had once outwitted, had never truly understood what they were running from. They had seen the transformation as annihilation, an end to all they were, but that had been their greatest mistake. Because this was not the end. This was the beginning. The hero felt it then, felt themselves unraveling, becoming. The last pieces of their individuality stretched outward, merging with the whole. Their thoughts no longer confined to one mind, but spread across infinity. And yet, they were still them. They had not lost themselves. They had expanded. And with that realization, the pattern completed itself. The final thread fell into place, and the universe shifted. A new force rippled across existence, something ancient and yet newborn. The pattern was no longer just a construct. It was alive. It had grown, ascended, and in its wake, a new era began. The invaders who had once fled this transformation had been right about one thing. Nothing would ever be the same again. But what they had failed to understand was that this was never destruction. This was evolution. The hero, no, the being they had become, felt the universe stretch before them. Endless, limitless, the past, the future, all woven together in a perfect design. And for the first time they saw everything. They turned their gaze to the stars, no longer a lone survivor, no longer a single mind lost in the void. They were part of it all. And then, with a thought, they took their first step into the infinite. Please, subscribe this channel to get more interesting stories in future.